Iran has shown itself to be, in practice, one of the countries most unconditionally opposed to U.S. hegemony in the world. Since the revolution in 1979, Tehran has fought in a number of bitter wars and conflicts promoted by the United States and Israel in Iraq, the Persian Gulf, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, indirectly and indirectly. But it's also faced severe sanctions from the West. It also occupies a geostrategic position in the Middle East, on the Persian Gulf, between Central Asia, South Asia, and the Caucasus. It's been a crucial area for geopolitical powers in the 21st century. Brzezinski, the former national security advisor to Jimmy Carter, said that it's not viable to attack Iran because militarily and strategically it would be very difficult to have any victory there. And therefore, he said, diplomacy must prevail rather than any kind of preventive war. Nonetheless, in the recent declarations, there is increasingly belligerent posture by the part of the military-industrial complex in the United States. So are we seeing a big new increase in tensions between the United States and Iran? So tensions between the United States and Iran, a war of attrition or military confrontation. That's the topic today in Critical Moves. Tension is increasing in the Persian Gulf. At the weekend, the Foreign Ministry of the United Arab Emirates denounced acts of sabotage against 4 ships of various nationalities in its waters, particularly in the port of Fujairah, one of the biggest oil terminals in the world, and on the coast of the Strait of Hormuz. The government of the Emirates didn't give any details, but many executives in the region are very worried about existing tensions and the possibility of an escalation, an unintended escalation. The explosions didn't leave any victims or oil spills, but could they be a conspiracy organized to undermine the stability in the region? The United States has been making movements amongst its allies. It says it's on alert against possible actions by Iran, while the head of the Aerospatial Division of the Revolutionary Guard of Iran said that if the United States make any such movement, we will hit them in the head. And an aircraft carrier with 40 to 50 crafts may have been a threat in the past, but now it's an opportunity, he said. So let's look at the map. One of the biggest risks of a military confrontation in the region will be the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which is an absolutely strategic world trade route. Various countries border on the Strait of Hormuz, but its security has always been under the leadership of Iran. And Iran has said that Hassan Rouhani said that Mr. Trump, don't play with the tail of the lion. We have always ensured security in the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow sea inlet located between the Gulf of Oman to the southeast and the exit of the Persian Gulf in the southwest. To its north, it's between 100 and 160 kilometers wide, and all the countries, many of the world's biggest oil producers border it and send their oil through it. Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and partly Oman. A third of all the world consumed in the world passes through the Strait of Hormuz every day. And all these countries converge on the export of oil and liquid natural gas converge on the Strait of Hormuz. Although it's surrounded by several countries, Iran is the power that has traditionally controlled its security. Both the US, but also a large part of Asia, depend on oil coming through the Straits of Hormuz. China has been the biggest purchaser of oil coming from there. Now it's the center of tension between Washington and Tehran after Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal. A closure of the strait could destabilize oil prices and indeed the whole of the world economy. A rumor could spark a war of expectations and speculation in prices. Any big upset in the supply of oil or its prices could radically revise world growth forecasts. So let's go to some websites. Let's first to RT. On the 7th of May, Iran will stop complying with some voluntary commitments in the nuclear deal. President Hassan Rouhani said on national television that after a decision of the Security Council, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mohammad Javad Zarif, said in Moscow that Iran will not leave the nuclear deal completely, the JCPOA, or Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in English. The United States announced on the 22nd of April that it would reimpose sanctions on all the countries who buy crude from Iran once the present exemptions expire. And that happened on the 2nd of May. And there's been a big campaign of pressure to deal with, as they say, the destructive activities of Iran. Let's listen to the announcements or the response of Hassan Rouhani and Javad Zarif, and then the responses. Today, Iran is defending two things. We will not sell enriched uranium or heavy water. This decision is for 70 days. The United States, the European Union see the United States as a sheriff, and therefore they don't take independent decisions. Iran has maintained its commitments within the joint plan, despite the U.S. actions. The decisions taken today by the Islamic Republic are based on the agreement, not like the United States, who have withdrawn. Now we have a brief opportunity for them to come back into the agreement, for those who remain in the agreement, the European countries, to implement it. So now we go to Telesur. The European Union reiterates its support for the Iran nuclear deal. Federica Mogherini, the Foreign Affairs representative of the EU, said that the bloc of 28 countries will continue to support the accord as far as it can with all the instruments available. And that she said that they want dialogue between Washington and Tehran as a way to overcome their differences and to avoid an increase in tension. For this Monday, we're planning a meeting in Brussels between the European Union, United Kingdom, Germany, to analyze support for the deal. And as Iran says, the European Union has to take a clear position. And now to our geopolitics RU, the difficult case of Iran, overthrow or war. The writer says that we know that the problems of the Middle East are not internal problems, but are provoked to destabilize countries. This was seen in the Arab Spring revolts of 2011, clandestine plans to destabilize, promoted by intelligence agencies like the CIA, MI6, and Mossad. On the other hand, we've seen how countries like Iraq and Libya were part of military intervention by NATO. And there's a justification that they give for this, which is explained in the article. So that's worth reading in detail. So let's go now to our Hisham Wanous, our correspondent in Damascus, Syria. Greetings from Damascus. Since the United States withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the U.S. has reimposed a series of punitive sanctions against Iranian companies, but also with third country companies that do business with Iran. In response to the U.S. measures, Iran threatened to close the strategic Strait of Hormuz, where about a third of the world's oil passes. That could send prices rocketing and provoke a world economic crisis. On the 8th of May, the National Security Council of Iran announced some measures of suspending some measures of the nuclear deal, and that this will come into effect in 60 days if the European Union doesn't take a clear position. Federica Mogherini of the EU repeated her support for the nuclear deal with Iran before the meeting which happened on the 13th of May in Brussels with representatives of the United Kingdom, France and Germany to see how to continue supporting the Iran nuclear deal, although there are discrepancies with Iran on regional issues. They said this is the best way to overcome differences and reduce tension in the region. We should also remember that the European Union rejected Iran's measures. The National Security Advisor of the White House, John Bolton, announced Washington's decision to send bombers and an aircraft carrier close to the coast of Iran. And it was said on the 12th of May that Washington was preparing all the diplomatic and military resources needed for a possible response if Iran takes hostile measures. The commander of the Revolutionary Guard's aerospatial section said that the United States, because of its presence in the Persian Gulf, said that Iran's defensive capacity is sufficient and that such aircraft carriers are vulnerable. We should also point out that on the 12th of May, there were media reports of strong explosions in the port of Fujairah in the United Arab Emirates, in several ships in the port. The foreign minister of the UAE said ships had been damaged by sabotage, and the Saudi energy minister said that two of their ships were the targets of sabotage in the UAE. Warplanes from the US and France have been flying over the region, and this comes a week after the announcement by John Bolton, which caused Iran to express its concern over what had happened and the possibility of conspiracies to destabilize the region, and called on countries in the region to remain alert in the face of any sort of foreign adventures. And Iran criticized U.S. militarism in the Middle East, and the Iranian authorities have also condemned the role played by Israel, which, according to Iran, is against the U.S. hostile action, and are looking for means to promote a war between the two sides, which would have catastrophic consequences. And Saudi Arabia is also supporting these moves, according to experts. And the president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, made it clear that Iran will not retreat. That's not in line with Iranian history or culture, and called for a solution, and that the cohesion of the Iranian people would allow Iran to overcome the very severe sanctions against it. Back to you in the studio. Thank you, Hisham, for all that information. Now let's go to Jorge Stozo in Washington. So what's the latest diplomatic moves in Washington, Jorge? Thank you. From outside Washington, Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, left apparently for Russia. However, on the way, he seems to have changed course and gone to Brussels to talk to the European Union, to talk to them about the situation in Iran, which is the burning topic for U.S. foreign policy at the moment, and very worrying for Europe as well, after the decision by the United States to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. Saudi Arabia and Israel seem to be lined up with U.S. policy in the sense of increasing the offensive against Iran, and the leader of Iran came out recently to say that we had to prepare for a very difficult period, as difficult as the eight-year war with Iraq, because the policy of the United States, as in Venezuela, is to try and strangle, asphyxiate the Iranian people, limit their access to food and medicine, prevent it from being able to export oil, to blockade ordinary life in the country. So the European Union is absolutely opposed to this, because they say the United States is trying to twist its arm to leave the nuclear agreement, but not only leave the agreement, but also stop trading with Iran. So the hot topic today is this. Here in the United States, the version being sold, the idea that there's a baddie in the film, and that the United States' job is to serve justice to these baddies, is, of course, Iran, and the issue near the Strait of Hormuz, where these ships were apparently attacked. Although there were not big explosions or didn't produce serious damage, but in terms of the manipulation of the information in the media, the implication is that Iran must be behind such explosions, and that therefore Iran is a threat to the flow of oil and trade in the region, and therefore the United States presents itself as the gendarme to put things in order. So Iran is receiving the object of this very aggressive offensive by the United States. Thank you, Jorge. And while we were talking to our correspondents, Hisham Wanous and Jorge Estozo, we've had some questions here. So what are the origins of this conflict? Why is there this? Why are there such enemies, Iran and the United States? Should we assume that there could be a large armed conflict which would involve perhaps the closure of the Strait of Hormuz? Are the sea routes and security of the region in danger? So we'll take up some of these questions with our guests after the break. So, tensions between the United States and Iran, is it a war or is it military confrontation? Let's go to the origins of this confrontation historically. Since Donald Trump became president, the tension between the United States and Iran has increased continuously. Nonetheless, Washington has been attacking Iran since 1979, when the Islamic Revolution triumphed and took power from the Pahlavi. The White House supported Iraq against Iran in the war of the 80s. Since April 1980, after April 1980, the United States began to apply sanctions against Iran with a brutal trade embargo. Then there was the shooting down of an Iranian aeroplane during the presidency of Ronald Reagan, which killed 290 people, shot down by a missile from a U.S. cruiser. In 1993, the White House tried to involve Iran in an attack on the World Trade Center. Nonetheless, it was clear that it became clear that Al-Qaeda had been behind it, which of course originated in the US's own war against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. In 1995, the United States, under Bill Clinton, decreed an economic embargo, a total embargo, against Iran because of its supposed nuclear activities. These accusations again about in July 2015, the United States, the United Kingdom, China, France, Germany, plus Iran, of course, signed the Iran nuclear agreement, which in exchange for winding down its nuclear program, Iran would have its sanctions lifted. But then Trump pulled out of the nuclear deal in spite of the pressure from the European Union not to do so. He's also declared the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. So, let's go to our guests from Rosario in Argentina, Abu Faisal Sergio Tapia, political writer on Middle Eastern affairs, and from Euskadi, or the Basque Country, Aritz Saidi Olatua, international analyst. Thank you for your time. Earlier, we were talking to Pepe Ortega in Barcelona, and his hypothesis was that we are witnessing a provocation by the United States and its allies to destabilize, but not to have a direct military confrontation, because, according to him, this would not suit anyone and would bring down the whole world economy. What do you think? Yes. Greetings.
Bueno, allí planteábamos la pregunta. Sí, dígalo.
Well, what we see is that the policy of the United States the agenda pushed by Trump and the break with the Iran nuclear deal is seeking to push forward the plans of Benjamin Netanyahu, which is to confront the Islamic Republic of Iran, isolate it, and through severe sanctions try to submit the Islamic Republic. It hasn't achieved that. The Republic of Iran has responded, reaffirming its sovereignty and that it will not submit to the imperialist policies. Iran is the world's biggest producer of natural gas, the third of oil, and an armed confrontation with Iran would take oil to $150 a barrel or more, collapsing the world market. And in 2020, Trump has to face elections where he will be supported by the Zionist lobbies. On the other hand, there is the European Union, which has been rather quiet, but Iran has given them 60 days for them to respond to oppose Trump's measures. But we also know that there are 40 billion euros worth of investments on the part of the European Union in Iran. It's a significant amount of money. And that's why the European Union wants to maintain the nuclear agreement with Iran. We need the money, we need the gas, we need oil, they say, and we'll continue to trade with Iran. Russia has said they will not allow themselves to be put under pressure, nor China, nor India, who are the biggest purchasers of Iranian oil. So the United States is playing the Zionist card, sending aircraft carriers to the Persian Gulf to put pressure on Iran. And we saw yesterday that these oil tankers from Saudi Arabia and other countries were supposedly sabotaged. So this may be a false flag operation by the United States, but it's certainly part of their belligerent diplomacy. Now, let's go to Aritz in Euskadi. Iran has been saying that after this sabotage condemned by the United Arab Emirates, has suggested that could be the result of a conspiracy to destabilize the region. Hisham mentioned something important, that United States and France started flying military aircraft over the area immediately afterwards. So do you think this could be a false flag operation with the support of governments in the region, allies of the United States? This is repeating a situation we've seen before in other places, where the empire, where it sets its eyes, by chance, there suddenly emerge motives, reasons to be able to attack or to judge a nation. When they put their sights on Syria and they say such and such is a red line, when they suddenly that red line is crossed. The same happens in Venezuela. and now in Iran. I don't know how far this will be of a dimension to begin a real conflagration. I think most people want to avoid that. But I think it will certainly increase the suffering of the Iranian people with these increased sanctions, which is the modern form of warfare, which attacks directly the civilian population, not so much the government system, but more against the people of the country, increasing the suffering of the Iranian people in this case, to try promote movements against the government, to try and use that as leverage, or to try and push the government into changing its positions. But as our colleague just said, it could be, and this would be a war essentially ordered by Israel against Iran, which is opposed to its own expansionist desires. Aritz, I just want to combine two things. As in Venezuela and as you've referred to, history has shown the United States combines different methods of attack. Economic warfare is one. Is it possible by this? Could the United States bring down the Rouhani government through this means? They've found it difficult to really have much impact on Iran in the past. And the other question I want to ask you about is about the Strait of Hormuz as a strategic passageway. Is that the strongest weapon that Iran has? I think that, as you said, this agenda, or this way of operating, has been repeated in many places, and always they try to deliver blows in the most sensitive part, the civilian population, to try and get them to rise up against the government, whether it's in Venezuela or whether it's in the Islamic Republic of Iran or in Cuba. The governments that don't submit to the US agenda are in their sights, and they apply all kinds of strategies to bring down these governments. These coercive measures, in some cases even genocidal measures, in the suffering they promote and the death they promote. The case of Yemen is very clear, and it seems nobody cares. Apart from that, then there could be the beginning of an actual war around the Strait of Hormuz, which is so important for the flow of oil and gas for the whole world, providing something like a third of all the oil supplies. But in military terms, for Iran, the Strait of Hormuz, it's relatively easy for them to close it. That's why the United States has sent the Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier to the region. So we'd have to see if really this escalation and these threats by Bolton and Pompeo, talking almost, speaking with such hatred of the Iranian people, the direct threats We'll have to see if they really dare to enter into an open conflict with the Islamic Republic of Iran, because Iran is not Syria in 2011, it's not Yemen, it's not Libya in Gaddafi, it's a regional power with the latest technology, with millions of soldiers prepared to give everything. So you'd have to see to what extent the United States is really prepared to see its soldiers die for Israel then. So going back to Abu Faisal in Argentina, Pompeo recently made a surprise visit to Iraq, to Baghdad, and met the Prime Minister. He suspended a meeting with Angela Merkel, alleging an imminent threat from Iran in the Persian Gulf. So is the United States trying to get Iraq to pressure Iran? Clearly, Pompeo and the whole staff in the White House, Bolton, are trying to put pressure on Iran. Iraq has said no. Iraq knows that it's Iran that's basically helped them fight terrorism in Iraq. And we should remember that the United States, in its interventions, also always produces both victims and terrorists. This agenda is profoundly Zionist. Who would win with this would be Israel. This agenda from Washington, London, and Saudi Arabia, in Syria, in Yemen, the crime, but they always come up against the resistance of peoples. And in the case of Iran, is a world reference. So they allege terrorism in Afghanistan, in Syria, as reasons for their interventions. So this agenda is to split up the Middle East, which could strengthen the presence of Israel in the region. But military action against Iran would be suicidal for the United States. It's more or less impossible, because then you'd have Russia and China supporting Iran. So what the United States is doing is trying to provoke the situation within the context of elections. Their plans in Venezuela have failed. They've been defeated by the Bolivarian Revolution, by the Venezuelan people who said no to imperialist intervention. So that agenda failed. They're failing in Syria, they're failing in Yemen, because Syrian imperialism is seriously weakened. And that's why Trump putting pressure on, recognize the Golan Heights as belonging to Israel, but they're not really achieving anything. They're isolated. And the resistance in the Middle East is not letting them achieve their plans. Russia and China are supporting Iran, and they know that this is a vital actor for stability in the Middle East, against Washington, which represents death, crime in the Middle East. Abu Faisal and Aritz, thank you very much for your contributions. So, let's see how the balance of forces is playing out. Abu said Is the European Union a strategic counterweight to the United States? And Rouhani spoke about this, we referred to it earlier, that the European Union has to take a clear position to assert and implement the nuclear deal with Iran. So, will the European Union really distance itself from the US position and not submit to the pressures of the White House and continue trading with Iran? We'll analyze that in our last block after the break. So the tensions between the United States and Iran, a war of attrition or military confrontation. So now let's look at the pressure that the United States has exerted against Iran. We have to analyze them in a geopolitical context in which the United States is promoting this agenda, but is also losing ground as a hegemonic power. The United States is trying to compensate its loss of influence and power for years, especially in the Arab world. So Turkey and Qatar, two countries which were strategic allies of the United States, have begun to take a distance and become more independent from the desires of the White House. The defeat in Syria and its failure to overthrow the Bolivarian government in Venezuela make evident the weakness of the United States, and now it's taken its offensive against Iran to reassert its hegemony and show its power alongside its allies Saudi Arabia and Israel. Saudi Arabia needs to weaken the Persian country after getting bogged down in Yemen. And Israel is also keen to weaken Iran because of the situation in Syria. In the Gulf, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, made a lightning visit to Baghdad after cancelling a meeting with Angela Merkel, alleging an increasing tensions and threats from Iran, possibly on US military forces in the Persian Gulf. Supposedly, this was based on intelligence information. However, analysts say it would be very difficult, unlikely, that the United States would attack Iran because of its military strength and because in such a conflict, Iran would close the Persian Gulf to oil, which provoke a huge economic crisis, and because Iran would have the support of Russia and China. So let's go now to Gabriel Aguirre, international analyst, General Secretary of the International Solidarity Committee on the Struggle for Peace in Venezuela. So let's ask this question, which you've heard. The European Union has not managed to fulfill its promises to Iran, so it has a good position on paper, but not in practice, referring to the European incapacity to confront Washington and make the trade agreement with Iran function and overcome the sanctions. So, the posture of the European Union is key. What will they do? I think it's interesting, important to analyze what has been the basis of this aggression against Iran and the US plans to try and control 70% of the world's oil, which you find in that region. The European Union, although it may appear in its discourse may appear as an independent power, the fact is, historically, it's always been following along behind the tail ending of the United States. The European Union has big investments in Iran, and it needs the oil that Iran produces. The European Union was one of the main consumers of Iranian oil. The EU's policy, the United States has used sanctions as a main instrument of its diplomacy. In fact, there's nothing diplomatic about it, of course, but the European Union, in different conflicts, has it done anything to oppose this? The monopolies in the European Union, in Britain, France, Germany, which need to trade, need to sell their products. The United States has threatened different actors in the world. It's been so exaggerated, the policy, that the United States has threatened the judges of the International Criminal Court with sanctions. So it's lost its legitimacy as hegemonic power, because now the United States and its imperialist policy has converted itself into a state which doesn't respect any of the basic international laws of the game, rules of the game. It withdrew from the Iranian nuclear deal in 2018. It doesn't respect the world or the international community in the face of its inability to maintain its hegemony through diplomacy. It has to resort to the use of force. So seeing this situation with Iran, what's the strategy? The strategy is clear. It's to increase sanctions. Alongside the economic goes the possibility of military provocations and conflict. In the first war with Iraq, they say that Iran is promoting the possibility of attacks against its territory. The United States needs to be coherent with the interests of other powers in the region, especially Israel, the Zionist agenda, and the Wahhabi agenda of the Saudis, and to create the conditions in the country which would permit an uprising against the Islamic Revolution. But we heard what Rouhani said. He called for unity of the patriotic forces of the country to confront these new sanctions, this new aggression against the party, because these unilateral measures affect the people of Iran. And the strategy is to asphyxiate the economy, provoke internal pressure, to destabilize and try and change the government. And would armed conflict be a suicide for the United States? Look, in imperialist policies and the economic interests and the intercapitalist competition, nothing can be excluded. In military terms, it might be that the United States may not want to go to a direct military conflict with Iran, given Iran's military power. It's a regional power, has a powerful armed forces, which cannot be underestimated, in the Persian Gulf. And of course it controls the Strait of Hormuz, which would affect not only the exports of oil from the region, but also the import of goods into the Gulf countries. So closing the straits for 1 day, 2 days would have huge impacts for a year, 6 months or a year, with huge impacts on the world economy. Is the United States prepared to pay that kind of cost in the military confrontation with Iran, which has the capacity, which has been assuring security in the Straits of Hormuz for decades? But the hawks of war in Washington, like Pompeo or Bolton. They are not behaving in a diplomatic way at all. They're promoting conflicts in different parts of the world. And in the case of Israel, which does have nuclear weapons, obviously that's a threat to world peace. The possibility of using nuclear weapons
pero que ellos como potencia sí tienen la capacidad de comprar. Es decir, yo te denuncio porque tú desarrollas armas nucleares.
They say I'm going to condemn you for developing nuclear weapons, but you can sell your enriched uranium to me so that I can give it to the Israelis. So it's a completely double standard that's being applied. And what about the possibility of a multipolar world? Iran, as a regional power, together with Syria in the Middle East, plays a balancing role between the interests of the United States, European Union, and also the interests of emerging powers like Russia and China. So in terms of trying to seek a multipolar world with multiple centers, without a single hegemonic power that imposes its agenda. So the position of Iran in relation to Palestine and Syria has been key, showing its possibility as a regional power to guarantee the rights to sovereignty of those other countries. So this is how the countries of the region can develop and use their resources without other powers who pillage their resources and enrich themselves with them for their own economies, their own industrial, weakening other countries in the world and carrying out. So the energy question is key, obviously, in this, with the Straits of Hormuz, but also saying that the Pompeo, the Secretary of State, who is an influential person in the oil industry, is working on alliances to control the world oil market. There are alliances here to try and control world energy resources. And this has to do with, of course, this has to do with the case of Venezuela. How, through this intercapitalist competition between different imperialist powers in the world, you need to control the maximum amount of resources to present yourself before the world as the power that controls economic resources. And this turns into strengthening of your military apparatus to defend your economic interests. And this is what historically the United States has done. Pillaging other countries, controlling strategic resources and strategic markets and trade routes to guarantee to its corporations, its monopolies, the resources, the strategic resources they need. This development of the policies promoted by Mike Pompeo and the oil lobby is what's happening in Venezuela. The increase of coercive measures against Venezuela, the blockade against Venezuela, has the principal object to control the biggest proven reserves of oil in the world. Some of the biggest reserves of gold. This is a big necessity for the imperial interests. And this is clear politically, economically, and militarily. Thank you very much, Gabriel. So, let's move on to our conclusions. So our analysts can agree we shouldn't exclude either option, The military-industrial complex is deploying a huge arsenal against governments it can't control. The decision of the European Union is fundamental, but it looks difficult for it to separate itself completely from U.S. interests. The Strait of Hormuz, key for the flow of oil and gas, which is controlled, whose security is controlled by Iran. And of course, there's also a conflict between the unipolar world and the multipolar world. And intervening in Iran could be militarily a suicide of the United States because of Iran's huge military power. The United States has interfered in its different ways in Libya, in Yemen, but will it intervene in Iran? We'll see. Until next time.